Hello and welcome to this Automation Academy Mastering the Machine webinar for the 26th of April 2024. Today's topic was Advanced HMI and Visual Studio. Advanced HMI is a free HMI programming software with drivers for various PLCs. Hope you enjoy it. Good morning, folks, and welcome to this Automation Academy Mastering the Machine webinar for the 26th of April 2024. This is the 73rd webinar that I've done over the past 2 or 3 years. And this one is on Advanced HMI primarily, but we will be getting a little bit into Visual Studio and talking once again about HMI and PLC simulation, which is kind of where I use the Advanced HMI platform, though it can be used for much more. So first off, what is the Automation Academy? The Automation Academy is a membership website that I started several years ago. It has training videos for Allen Bradley, Siemens, Beckhoff, Omron, some things on Advanced HMI. Of course, all these webinars are hosted there, and you can go back and review those. There is some job and aptitude assistance documents, things like that. Some videos on systems integration, lots of information on there. There is some software that you can download. Some of it is free PLC software that you can get elsewhere, but I've kind of archived everything into one place for different platforms. Some of these platforms, you can't even find the software anymore, like RS Trainer. But I have an old copy of it and I put it there, Omron software, that sort of thing. We do have a community with some interest groups on it, specific to different platforms, and it's called IO Central. That's free to anybody. You don't have to join the Automation Academy to join that. But if you go to www.community.automationllc.com, you will find IO Central. And we do have these webinars. They were about every 2 to 3 weeks starting out. Now I'm almost down to once a month now because they take a while to put together and I'm not always here. So one of the features that I've kind of been pushing in the Automation Academy is that it's not just all about PLCs, right? PLC programming is a very small part of controls engineering and systems integration. And you need to know some preliminary things like basic math and things like that, but then there's industrial math. There is different kinds of coding. You need to know what digital and analog are, and different numbering systems, lots of other things, motion control, machine safety, some of the plant-based things, ERP and MES. You may want to know something about that. Nowadays, we have a lot of AI and machine learning incentives, things like that. Some Industry 4.0 and Industrial Internet of Things topics. So there's a lot of things that you need to learn in addition to PLC programming, and the Automation Academy is a very good place to get some of that information. Okay, so first off, who is Advanced HMI? Kind of the history of this. I teach for a company called Automation Training in Canada, teach PLC programming classes across the country, and sometimes at customer facilities and that sort of thing. And Automation Training's been doing this for a long time. I'd say since about 2003. They have pretty well tested classes, PLC classes for Siemens and Allen Bradley. They do have HMI classes, and sometimes we use the HMI software to run, basic interfaces with the PLC, just push buttons and things like that so that you can activate tags inside of the PLC if you don't have a real trainer. So you have a real trainer a lot of times with push buttons and pilot lights on them, but you also sometimes need to run an emulator. And if you run an emulator, you don't have real push buttons, so you have to use programmed push buttons. And several years ago, well, I'd say 5 or 6 years ago or more, Automation Training, one of the people there came up with an HMI that had buttons and lights, and it had a little potentiometer on it and little meters that simulated the buttons and lights and things like that on the trainers. Now you see some trainers kind of behind me here, and some of those have buttons and lights and things like that. But if you don't have the full trainer, if you're running on an emulator, or if multiple people want to get into the same PLC and they don't want to share the buttons, these HMIs are a great way to do that. Now, at Automation Training, their HMI, you can configure it to talk to Allen Bradley or Siemens or Beckhoff or whatever, but it has all the same buttons and things like that on it. And you're just using different drivers to talk to the bits inside of the PLC. But you can't use multiple advanced HMIs with different buttons on them, which is something that I'm working on. For instance, let's say 4 people are sharing a PLC. In that case, you would each create your own program inside of it, have local tags to that program, and then your HMI would interface with the local tags. I'm doing that right now because sometimes I teach classes where people share the PLCs, and I'll have one of them use the real push buttons and one of them use the HMI, but you can't have, say, 4 people do it. There's just no way to share all those tags. So, I mean, you can split the buttons and that sort of thing. But anyway, so they built this operator interface, and I knew a little bit about Advanced HMI before that, but I asked Automation Training a little bit more about about Advanced HMI, and they said, well, you go online and you get the software, and it's really programmed in Visual Studio, but these are add-ons, and so all the buttons and the lights and things like that are available. And so I went to the website, I downloaded the software, I played with it a little bit. This was probably back in about 2017, but didn't really have an ultimate purpose for it. So I continued using all of my, Factory Talk View and WinCC and things like that whenever I did my own classes, because I generally didn't have a whole lot of people that needed to share things. During one of my automation training classes, I was in South Carolina, and I drove through Orangeburg, South Carolina, and I met with Archie Moore, who is the owner and the creator of Advanced HMI, and we got to talk a little bit. And he uses Allen Bradley PLCs sometimes, and he uses Beckhoff and things like that. But I asked him, what do you use for your SCADA? Do you use Ignition or Wonderware or something like that? And he said, nope, I use Advanced HMI for everything. I put SCADA systems into plants, and this is the platform that I use. And that made me realize, okay, the capability of Advanced HMI is pretty much unlimited. Now, the programming is a little harder. These folks who've created SCADA platforms have built a lot of utility into there that you would have to create yourself. Some of it's in the Advanced HMI package. Archie's made it easier for you to get at some of those components, but it still takes a pretty good knowledge of Visual Studio itself. So that's when I advertised this, I said, how does this relate to Microsoft and VB.net? Even though there are some tutorials on Advanced HMI and there is a forum and people can ask questions, one of the things I've seen on the forum is people ask all kinds of questions that don't relate to HMI, to Advanced HMI. They relate to Visual Studio. And you're going to have to learn that on your own. You're going to have to go in and look at YouTube videos or whatever, or just start experimenting and learn that end of it. And then, of course, Advanced HMI has some nice plugins. Without any further ado, let me see what we got here. That's the last screen on this. I'm going to bring over the Advanced HMI interface. So had this popped up on a different screen. This is a operator interface that I created specific to PLC classes that I teach. So one difference between the classes that I teach and the ones at Automation Training has it's a kind of the same method that Allen Bradley uses and Siemens, things like that. They have all these buttons and indicators. They have analog inputs and analog outputs. You can see here, I've got some potentiometers, channel 1 out, channel 2 out. This is very similar to the hardware on a trainer. But one of the things that I do that's a little bit different when I teach classes, I've had my own classes now for 6 or 7 years that I teach independently. And I teach, you've seen this on my other YouTube videos. I start out with some code that looks like this. So I have you create auto and manual mode. I have you do an auto cycle start. I have a stack light, and you go into the, let's see, outputs, and see you light a stack light if you're in auto mode, in manual mode, all that sort of thing. So rather than just teaching you timers and bits and things like that, I am kind of going into machine control. And so I needed an interface for that. And on the trainers, you don't have a stack light. You do have these individual pilot lights and things, but you don't have a stack light. You definitely don't have cycle start, cycle stop, reset, auto, manual, push buttons. So I kind of, when I created my own little HMI here, I put all those on there. Let's go ahead and run this and show you a little bit of what it looks like. This is, notice, this is Visual Studio. So if I go in here and, for instance, I click on a button, I get all these properties. And a lot of these properties, these are advanced HMI's components that you drag onto this, and they have a field, for instance, for the driver that you want to use. In this case, this is an OPC driver. I am interfacing with an emulator, as I've done before here. And so when I push a button or whatever, I'm pushing a virtual button inside of a PLC program running on an emulator, right? Studio 5000 emulator. So we're not going to talk about that. But for me to run this, all I do is hit this little start button here, and it kind of percolates, and hopefully it's compiled well, and you can see it's running statistics and things like that here. And then, as you can see, hopefully this will come up. The HMI is now running, right? So I've got a light here, and that happens to be pinned, I believe, to manual mode. So if I go into auto, see, there's auto, and this light's pinned to auto. This is kind of a legacy thing. It's not actually the latest and greatest platform that I'm using. I'm programming the latest HMI that I'm working on a different computer. And a couple differences that it does have this same stack light and these buttons. It has 16 push buttons and 16 indicators, fills more or less the same space. Instead of these meters, I just used numerical values, and I actually used the raw values, 0 to 32,767 that you would get out of an analog card and that sort of thing. But you can see here, this one works pretty well. Again, this one has a couple drivers in it, but it's right now it goes from 0 to 32,700, and that's one of the features of when you assign the limits for this. It kind of needs to be a division of 10 to make it work properly. So that's just a feature of the pot. So rather than 32,750 whatever for analog, I went up 0 to 32,700. It's pretty close. And of course, you can drive these meters, and these are all little widgets that you can get from Advanced HMI, and you simply drag them onto the screen like you would in any HMI programming software, and then you configure the properties. When you're working in Visual Studio, you don't, let's see, do you have access to these properties? Let's see if I click on that. I have this field up here, but it looks like I don't have access to the properties. So I would need to stop my HMI if I'm programming. So this is the HMI. Again, you can drag it elsewhere and that sort of thing. I'm going to go ahead and close it down. You've had a look at how it works. It is pinned to push buttons. Let me see if I've got any of these push buttons in here. If you're programming something, see, there's where auto mode hits the push button. One of the things you have to do is you have to tie all of these addresses to all of these push buttons. And so the student would either need to type those in, or they could, and this is what I did on my other PLC, I made a single tag, and I just called it HPB, and then I used a dent, and I used .0, .1, etc. That makes it easier for the student because all they need to do is create one tag for inputs, one tag for outputs as far as digital. So that's another difference on my other HMI. But you can assign these addresses to pretty much anything you want to. We'll go ahead and kill this, as I mentioned. Once you kill this, you are back to your properties. So if I go in here and I click on this property and I browse down, it says the driver is OPC DA-COM, which is this little widget that you see down here, and that is simply dragged onto the screen. And the tag is HPB3. So on my other HMI I'm working on, it is HPB.3, right? Actually, this would be HPB.2 because it's 0.1.2. So that's a little confusing for students. So I would have them, for instance, alias a new tag and just call it PB1, alias it to HPB0. So you understand the idea behind that. I've kind of showed that before. I also did a much more rigorous job of naming these push buttons. I called it HPB1, HPB2, etc. All these indicators, pretty much the same thing. Pilot light 4, I did name these. The text, there's where you configure the text on the button and that sort of thing. You can change the font size, you can change everything. So really this interface is a Visual Studio interface more than it is an Advanced HMI interface. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this aside, and I'm going to show you how you would create a new Advanced HMI application. So first thing is you would download the software for free from Advanced HMI. Real quick, do I have their screen up? I do. So this is what their website looks like, www.advancedhmi.com. They are trying to sell you some of their computers and different things, most flexible software. Use it for absolutely no cost or restrictions. So you can even put it on multiple computers. You do need to follow the instructions that they give you, which is you need to make the source code available to anybody who would ask for it. If you're putting it on any kind of a commercial platform, you know, if you put it on somebody else's computer, especially, you really need to give the source code, because as Archie mentions, it is really frustrating when you have software and you can't modify it. So that was one of my frustrations with the automation training software. I don't have access to the source code. In all fairness, it's on their computers. It's not on customer computers. So nobody should necessarily have access to automation training's operating system. It's not your computer. It's not the student's computer, and it's not mine either. So not putting the source code on that is legit. But if somebody were to ask for it, hypothetically, automation training would have to give you the software, the source code, not the software. As far as the software, you would go to, let's see, products, Advanced HMI software, and you would download it, right? And they are on this recommended package 399Y beta. And I do have this downloaded on my other computer. It has kind of a different set of drivers. So I'm using, I want to say, Visual Studio 17, and I tried to open this package, and it didn't open in the Visual Studio that I have on the other computer. So I did 3.99Y, the beta, and you would download this details. You do need to kind of register, and they give it to you for free. You would get this base package here. You could run that also. And then you can buy all these little expansion packs from them if you want to. So I bought all the expansion packs. The grand total for all the expansion packs together was only $22. That's a pretty good deal. I noticed somebody just joined in, so I'm going to go ahead and put the Visual Studio back so you can kind of see what my little HMI that I just went through looks like. This, I just ran this for whoever just joined and kind of showed how it worked. That's the HMI I'm working on. But what I'm going through now is, again, how you would get this software, right? Go to the website, download it for free from advancedhmi.com. you would then, you would get a zip file, right? It would zip everything up. And so this is the zip file for a driver here. You can see the driver. You can see a bunch of sliders, expansion packs, meters, etc. These are the things you pay for. ControlLogic's driver was an extra driver. The drivers are already included. But anyway, you take this zip file. You would then copy it into a folder such as this one. So I've got a project simulate here, and make it a separate thing once you expand everything. What is inside of it, and I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Go in here, copy this, paste it into your wherever you want to put your projects. And I created a nice empty thing here, right? So paste that, extract it all, same way that you do anything in Windows. Extract all, and we just put it in the same folder. While it's doing that, maybe I'll show you what the actual files look like. Actually, this looks like it's going to extract pretty quick, and you can start right away with the application. You could create the same type of application that I have, for instance. There we go. So here's what it looks like. You would then open the solution. So that would open this in Visual Studio. Drag this aside, right? It'll give you all these fun warnings here. Okay, I want to open the project. So as I mentioned, this takes a certain amount of knowledge of Visual Studio also. It's not just, this is not Advanced HMI's interface. It is Visual Studio's, right? Which is Microsoft, also free. You can download this from Microsoft. So if I go in here and look at the main form, this is a basic main form. And behind the scenes, this is the kind of tricky part. There is a bunch of code. So if I double click on that, I will get the code that is already in that screen. And you can see here, for instance, there is a form change type thing here. And as I drag objects onto this form, which I go back to the designer here, I can go to my toolbox. See if I can find my toolbox. And I can drag objects onto this screen. I see properties. I don't see tools. Here we go. Here's some of the tools. So you'd have to drag this to the other side or whatever. Some of the Advanced HMI objects that they include in the base package, which are free, you can take a basic button and simply drag it onto the screen. Oh, well, before we do that, so the other thing that you need to do is you need to say, well, what am I going to talk to, right? What PLC do I want to talk to here? So in this case, I want to go to the drivers folder, and that's where that little widget I showed you before showed up. And in my case, I was using the OPC driver, and I drag it onto the form. Should have shown it. Yeah. Done this before, and it just dragged it right in. Oh, one important step, you do need to build it first. So what building the solution does, and again, I'm fairly new to all this Visual Studio programming too, so it's not intuitive to me to do some of this stuff. But what building does, same thing you would do in Backoff, is it takes all these files that are over here and it includes them to the point that you can drag them in, right? So you have to build first. Now let's try it. Save it. We built it. And then I should be able to drag things onto here. Let's try an Ethernet IP one. It still doesn't drag. Well, rather than doing all this live, I may just show you where this is on the other one. Like I said, maybe it drags from here. No, doesn't seem to drag from there either, but that's what I did originally, but there may be some other preparation things. It says build the project, add a driver component from the toolbox, set properties of the driver component, which I have done, of course, on my other application. And what that does, and I'm just going to go ahead and drag the other one over to save time. Like I said, I'm not an expert at this. I've been working with it for a few months here, and I've gotten a pretty good application out of it. I'll tell you some of the other problems that I'm having, but basically what happens is when you drag one of these over here, and I could probably drag a different driver. I'm going to delete this one. All right, and then you simply go over to your components. And drag it in. This is exactly what I did before, but for whatever reason, it is not dragging. And I don't have really an answer for that, but that's how you do it. And so all those instructions that I showed you before really do talk you through it. And of course, there's online, helps and things like that. And when you drag this, it basically just said, do the things that it says to do here. And I do have a more in-depth tutorial, and I went through pictorially exactly how I did this. And it really was just this. You built the project, add a driver component from the toolbox, drag it over, set the properties of it. And my properties look like pretty straightforward. Properties look like this. So what am I using for my OPC server? I am using the RS Links OPC server. The OPC topic is base 1. Let's see if I have that. That's another step that you have to do. RS Links. There it is. You go to your DDE OPC. You simply say, I want a new topic, right? And in my case, I'm using either base 1 or CLX project 1. I've used different things. And then you browse for, in my case, the emulator, which is what I've got here. So that is kind of a look at how you set up the DDE OPC. And that is specific to Allen Bradley. I believe my topic maybe is base 1. Let's see. We'll just close that out, minimize this, and base 1. You can see here. So base 1 is the PLC, which once again is this guy. So I have an emulator set up in the hardware. Its name is base 1, so the topic is base 1. That's how you go find all these tags. So when I say OPC DA COM1 HPB8, there is a tag in there named HPB8, which is HMI push button number 8. Kind of the way that works. Let me see here. I lost one of my screens, by the way. One of my Zoom screens. So it makes me wonder if I'm even on Zoom anymore. Hopefully somebody can tell me if they can see what I'm doing. But anyway, these components, another thing real quick on the components, they are in, when I unzipped all this fun stuff, right, there's the zipped file, there's the extracted file. I put all these in here, and the purchased widgets, right, your push buttons, your LED expansion pack, the meters, the fancy meters and the dials and sliders, of which this dial and slider, right, is one of those. They are purchased components. I actually went and, man, having some screen problems here. Things are going crazy. There we go. I actually took those purchase components, and I think I put them hopefully in here. Yes. So you have to import those in. They're basically libraries, but once you have them, and there are instructions how to do that. There's my dial and my thumb wheel and my track bar and vertical slide, things like that. You already have a lot of components, right? Data loggers and things like that. But then you take your purchase controls, you put them in here. They got other controls, so you can drag any of the existing controls here, animating, picture box, lots of things. So that's a little bit of a look at the programming of it. It's not particularly difficult, for instance, to just drag an object over here onto the screen. You know what? One of the things I'm not seeing here that, and again, I'm not. I'm trying to do this live, which is not necessarily the best idea. I've been working on this for a couple of days, but of course, I started my project a while ago. Is the toolbox usually shows up as a separate folder down here on the right side. And this here, it's in my Solution Explorer. So you would be dragging it from the toolbox, not from, which would be on this right-hand side rather than this. And for whatever reason, you can see I don't have all that showing. So I want to show you what I'm headed toward. You've seen what that HMI looks like. I've done a bunch of simulations on here in the past, and this is kind of what I'm headed for. So this is a little video that I made, started last week on it, and it's actually at Automation NTH. And I showed, you know, this is an Allen Bradley simulation that I run. Right? You can see it does some pretty fun stuff here. Right, place a part, and this simulates one of the HMIs at Automation NTH. Actually, it's a real application with a conveyor and that sort of thing. So lots and lots of different things you can do. I've done this before on this in this class here. Turn that down, and you can see the animation of a lot of these graphics. Everything that was done here theoretically can be done on Advanced HMI. So what you're seeing here with, you know, picking places and things like that, technically you could do that on Advanced HMI, and there would be some advantages to doing that. Right? So there's a little bit on my part tracking. There's my dial, place a part, it sweeps a part on there. So this is the Allen Bradley version, but the downside to this Allen Bradley version, one, you would have to open FactoryTalk View and then run an application that somebody else had prepared if what you're doing is taking a PLC class, right? The goal is not to learn necessarily the HMI programming, it's to do the PLC class and just do your programming, right? So all this stuff would have to be programmed ahead of time, but then I could give somebody the application. And you know, when I teach, for instance, back-off classes, or if I teach HMI classes, even in FactoryTalk View, I have them do things like this, right? Create a little animated screen that just changes colors of things or makes recipes or whatever. That's a pop-up keyboard. That's a problem, as I mentioned in this video, because the pop-up keyboard fills a major part of your main screen, not the HMI screen, not a true HMI simulation. But you can see here how animation works, and it would work exactly the same in Advanced HMI. And I went forward also, and I went through back off. I said, this is the simulation I use in the back off class. One advantage of the back off class is you can do things like bring up an audio file. You can't sound a buzzer on an emulator in Allen Bradley. I can't do that. But in Beckhoff, I can, because it's a computer. It's running on your computer and it brings up another file. So that's why I do this stuff. And here's a animated just push button light sequence that I go through and explain how it works. And then here is, this one's kind of fun. This is your typical animated graphic sequence for automation. Come on, start moving. There we go. So that's a little graphic of a, you know, moving sequence, that sort of thing. Doing auto and manual, doing e-stop and power. That's another thing I put on the other one. And then I talked a little bit in this video about things like factory IO, which some of you may know what that is. Factory IO is a something that simulates a factory, and it's 3D modeled, and it's pretty nice, and it interfaces with various PLCs. But it's $700 or $800 for a single year. That's one problem, right? So students couldn't have that themselves unless they wanted to create factory IO things, and then they still have to link it to all the buttons. So the simulation would not be done for you, but it's very cool in that, right? It has moving graphics, some of these things. So this is cool, right? It's kind of 3D modeled stuff. Again, couple downsides to this. One, it's expensive, as Factory Talk View is, and licensing and all that. And two, it is limited. It only has, what I saw was a lot of material handling stuff. That was mostly kind of what it did. So that's mostly kind of what I had about Advanced HMI. Let me bring this back over real quick, bring the application over. Like I said, behind all these, so if I open this screen up and I get the code, all of these objects, as you drag them into the form, create these, right? These little snippets of code. And a lot of these, to really get good at this and to animate, yes, I can go in here and I can adjust the properties. I can do a lot of things here. I can do the font, right? Lots of, I can change colors, all the typical things that you would do for an object. But if I want to do things kind of fancy, like this location, let's say I wanted to animate the location, these would have to be tags, and I would have to somehow move those locations, which of course I did in Factory Talk View. You can move the locations and change them dynamically. All you do is put a tag. Pretty much anything you see in here with a dark, right, bold, you can change the access to that by putting a tag in there. So this could be, for instance, object X position, object Y position, then pin that to a tag, change the tag value, and you would see this meter move around the screen. Okay, so in principle, that's what you would do. In a standard HMI, Factory Talk View, something like that, that's a pretty easy thing to do, because you take wherever you put that object as 0, and then you say, okay, here it's at 0, and then I drag it over and I say, here it's at 100. So I don't even necessarily need to look at the individual pixel counts or positions. But on Advanced HMI, I absolutely would. I would have to get into this code. I would change that animation, and I'd have to do some math in here, for instance, right? Any one of these things, these all represent subroutines. So to be really good at this, to do things like change forms, to adjust drivers, to set properties in drivers, I've found that you need to do math. You need to create local variables. Let's say I want a block on my screen where I can set the IP address of the PLC that I want to connect to. If that was done in numerical form, so I need to do things like make sure it's in the range of 0 to 255, which would be an Ethernet address, right? I would have to take that as a integer. I would have to check it, make sure it's not out of range, and then I would have to convert it into a string, and I would have to concatenate it with, dots and things like that to make the IP address go into the driver, right? So when I go down to the driver, which should be here, right, and I click on that driver and I look at these properties, the IP address for the other driver, which is the Control-Logix driver, would be typed in here, and that is in the form of a string. So to do things like concatenate all those numbers together, you have to put that code, you have to hard code it in here, right? You would go to the routine having to do with the driver, and you would type it all in there. So there's HMI drivers. This handles things like when you close the form, shutting down the driver, because if you didn't do things like that, you might find that you have 8 copies of the driver running because you've opened 8 different screens that all have to link to the objects on the screen. So like I said, I'm fairly new to this. I've got a pretty good working HMI for OPC. I have also tested this with the RS Links regular, the regular driver where you type in 192.168, 1.215 or something like that for your address. It works fine. And I've done some of this math to make sure that the numbers are qualified. But I am not an expert Visual Studio programmer. Most of what I've learned on Visual Studio, surprisingly, has been through learning Beckhoff. And I've done a lot of stuff in Beckhoff, but Beckhoff has a front end that I'm mostly programming the PLC. Every once in a while, yeah, you got to do things like bring up that little sound application, go out and find that on the internet and execute the application so that it makes a sound, a buzzer sound or whatever. That I've had to code in here, but I am not an expert. All these routines, all these objects, Archie created these at Advanced HMI so that you can drag them in here. He's made some things easier for you, but it is still, right? You still have to know this stuff. What is private? What is public? What is a class? What is a method, right? What is a procedure? All that stuff. How do you write this code, right? Subroutine, class, all this stuff. What does that mean? And like I said, I've learned a lot of this from my Beckhoff adventures, object-oriented programming, etc. But I'm really a PLC guy. So I tend to do most of my coding in ladder and, structured text and things like that. So I'm just diving into this, learning a lot more about drivers, etc. But that's what's involved. Pretty easy to just, get started with this. Let me make sure that's the media player. Bring the other one over. Again, this is what you would get when you start out. And again, not sure why I can't see it, but I would have my toolbox over here on the right. I would have properties and I would have toolboxes, and I would be able to drag from the toolbox, which is not what I'm seeing here. Toolbox. And I would drag from the toolbox into here. And that's usually after you build it. So try one more time here, build it. Kind of build everything. Maybe that's what I did, is I didn't build everything. Build solution. There we go. We skipped everything. And then if I click on here, I should see a toolbox over here on the right. And you drag from the toolbox. I drag an object like a push button or whatever onto the screen. And that's how that works. It's actually pretty easy to get started, but trying to do it while I'm talking on a webinar is not working very well for me. We have a chat. We do have a question here. Are you use Visual Basic language to create it? You do use Visual Basic to modify it. I did not create this, as I mentioned. Advanced HMI did. So you do have to use Visual Studio. So what you do is first install Visual Studio, and they'll talk about which version you need. Then you go and download Advanced HMI. And what Advanced HMI is it's mostly, it does have some nice controls that are easier than Visual Studio, like graphical push buttons, like the ones I showed you. And it also has all the drivers. So Advanced HMI drivers, what you're doing is plugging all of these, right? Here's the Allen Bradley drivers. Here's the Omron drivers. You're plugging all these into this, and then you're dragging objects from the controls in the toolbox, and then you're editing in Visual Studio. So it's Visual Basic, but it's also VB.net. So it uses the .net platform. That's the answer to that question. Hopefully that answers that. So did I use it? No, I didn't. Advanced HMI has made this easier. You simply drag objects onto the screen, but you still have to really be good at this, right? To be do the things that I showed in the video, right? With all the moving objects and everything. That takes some pretty elaborate coding. Like I said, I was able to do this to create this object, this screen. I'd say I recreated this on my other application. Took me no more than an hour. And most of the time was taken, I'd drag an object in, then I would go to its properties over here, and I would do things like, rename, this is PB6, called it momentary PB6. I would call it, HPB6. So I spent a lot of my time editing this. And then once you would do this, you would still have to save it all. It would recompile. You would run it. We'll run it again here just to show what it looks like. It may even ask me, do you want to save this? So see, now we're in kind of run mode, and you can see what the PC itself's doing. And then there's the HMI. So, right. And there its drivers kicked in, and now it's running. So, things like this dial. This is an advanced HMI dial. Without this, you would have had to build your own dial, because Visual Studio does not have this. You have to get these objects from somebody else. And he's made, these look like AB buttons, Alan Bradley, right? So he made those. He got these bitmap from somewhere, and then he dragged this in, and he gave you the ability, for instance, to change the properties of, things like this. We'll go ahead and I'll click a couple things here just to show you how it works, but then we'll go back to the development. Again, when you're, there we go, there's manual mode. So you can see the stack light changing here and things like that. Close this and take one more visit in here. And once again, there's the properties. So I can go in here, for instance, change the font, right? I changed all these fonts to Arial 10 point narrow bold to make the graphics look a little bit better. That's what I did over here to make this fit. So you have the same thing here. You can edit all the properties in here, but again, these objects were created by Archie when he put this together, and he makes a lot of these objects available for free. And then if you wanted all these push buttons, I want to say the dials and sliders pack maybe has it, or it may even come for free with the application. So, a lot of this stuff, you can get started and do your own HMI pretty quickly. You want to get the driver for the particular HMI you have. In my case, I'm using OPC, which OPC works with about any simulator and a lot of PLCs, right? You just set up an OPC topic. As I showed you before, you have to go into the Alan Bradley driver to set up the topic. You still need RS links in this case to set this up. But once you have it, right, there's all the settings for it. And like I said, there's some help files online, and Archie has a couple videos. In my opinion, it's very limited. There's just not a lot of examples of people doing the full application. He does an introductory video, and his works, right, where he actually shows you that first screen that I showed you, which is this one. And, he drags the driver in and the whole bit. He got his toolbox over here. For whatever reason, my toolbox is not showing. But he brings it up over here, and it takes him, I think his video is only 10 or 15 minutes long, and it takes him, 10 minutes to get the driver in there, configure it, drag a push button and a light, and connect to the PLC. Now, in my case also, I had to delete a lot of these things. When you go into the code, you'll see the actual objects in here for a lot of these things, right? So open forms, I think if I go click on this, for instance, I'll get the subroutine for that object, right, which is this picture click, right, picture box. So if I want to do something with that, I could make that Advanced HMI logo do something, and I would have to put the code in here to make it do whatever that is. And to do that, again, you have to learn Visual Studio, not Advanced HMI. So I would recommend to anybody, go ahead and download this, play with it, especially if you have a PLC. There are some free PLCs out there. Like I said, Omron, I have on my Automation Academy site. You can download the Omron software. It runs, it has drivers. It also has its own HMI. So you could do more like what I showed you on the Allen Bradley thing and just create it in Omron. Might be easier because the software is built in, but with Allen Bradley, you don't have any choice. I mean, their HMI software is $1,500, and it does run as a simulation, but you can do some nice fancy things with it. But honestly, this is free. Definitely highly recommend it. And like I said, as I learn more and as I create more, I will update some of these videos and things like that. Start video. So there we go. I guess I wasn't showing up here. See who all's here. See a few people. In any case, there we go. We're all tiled out. A couple people. Any other questions about this? So that's who they are. Go to that website, download Visual Studio first, install that, then download the Advanced HMI package, and it will talk you through getting started. It has a starting screen, drag the drivers in, configure them, and you will be up and running pretty quickly. So if you haven't checked it out already, my YouTube channel has other simulations and things like that on it, Automatic High or Automation Consulting LLC on YouTube. And you can see some other videos, certainly of Allen Bradley HMIs and Beckhoff HMIs and that sort of thing. So a lot of the stuff I showed you on the previous video, I went over in most of those other things. Much easier to program those. Animation is natural in most HMI software. It is not as natural. Yeah, I think we need more about user control, how we create and use it. I agree. And what I may do is create another video like Archie's of just opening the software, installing the driver, making it run. But what I can't do is, for instance, make a video where I install Visual Studio, because I've already got it installed and it runs my Beckhoff too. It runs Beckhoff, Advanced HMI, and everything else I'm doing. So that's the awkward part about it. But I think most people can get through installing Visual Studio, and then lots of resources online on how to program Visual Studio. I would recommend to anybody join things like Stack Overflow or even some of the PLC sites, PLC Dev, PLC Talk, things like that. Go look at Archie's site on Advanced HMI. He's got videos. YouTube is just a great resource for lots and lots of things. I've got 100 and some videos now on YouTube myself, including, of course, right? This is the 73rd webinar. So I have 72 other webinars on there, plus some stuff on Siemens and programming and Allen Bradley programming and all that good stuff. Thanks for hanging out. That's really it for me today. It's almost an hour of webinar. If you're interested in the Automation Academy, it does cost money. Unfortunately, you'd have to join that, but IO Central is free. And of course, my YouTube channel is free. I got 100 and some odd videos on there, and there's a lot of just free training on there and things like that. The next webinar, May 24th, that's almost a month from now. I don't know what the topic's going to be yet. I don't like doing the same topic 2 weeks in a row. I think last time we did Beckhoff. So I'm not going to do Advanced HMI again. Who knows? Maybe I'll have a lot of Visual Studio experience by then, and I'll do something more specifically on Visual Studio. But in any case, thanks for showing up. I don't have a topic yet for the next webinar. So somebody wants to, oh, there's a good question. Do you cover B&R automation PLCs? No, I have had a request to do that. I do Beckhoff, I do Allen Bradley, I do Siemens. B&R is loosely based on Codesys, from what I understand. And Codesys is very similar to Beckhoff. Everything I've heard about B&R is it's really hard to learn. And it's also pretty proprietary. So you really need to go to B&R to get the training for B&R. And I haven't seen a lot of good videos online for it. I've heard it's good for motion control. I've done webinars before here on, SuperTrack and AccuPause Track. I'm not a fan, and I'm not a fan of B&R for the same reason I'm not really a fan of Allen Bradley, even though I teach it. They are very closed. In other words, they have something called Automation Studio. I know that. And they are very locked down as far as, sharing things, and they don't create a lot of videos. And if you want to take training, there's not people running around doing training on it. Like I said, people pay me to do Allen Bradley and Siemens trainings. Why? Because there's lots and lots of Allen Bradley PLCs in the United States. It's probably 70% of the market. And worldwide, Siemens is the big boy. And so they're the largest in the world. So there's Siemens videos everywhere because people create them. There's a lot of Beckhoff videos because, like Jacob Sagatowski is very good at Beckhoff, and he creates some very good YouTube videos on that. But B&R, somewhat proprietary. I'm headed more the Beckhoff direction right now. They have the same thing, like you have that Super Track and AccuPause Track. Beckhoff has all that. They have it's a different thing. It's a X planar and X linear or something like that. But they have a whole bunch of platforms that do the same thing B&R does. So I had somebody ask me, I have a choice between Siemens, Schneider, and B&R. And I said, here's my order of preference. Siemens, number one, biggest in the world, plus I know it really well, so I can help you with it. Second choice, Schneider, because I'm learning Codesys and because Codesys is very similar to Beckhoff. So I'm getting good at it. I'm getting much better. And I have a Codesys PLC. I do not have a B&R PLC, and I will never buy one. I have no urge to do that. Cover Siemens STL language. That's a good suggestion, and I can absolutely do that. One problem with STL, it is Step 7 Manager most of the time that uses that. The only PLC I do have a Step 7 300 behind me, right here, right? And then I have, sitting beside me here, I have a TIA Portal 1200. The 1200 does not program in STL. So how do I can't do it in TIA Portal, but I have Step 7 Manager. I can do that. Maybe that's what I do next time. Maybe I make it on Siemens in general. I'd be happy to do that. Haven't touched Siemens for a little while. And I have both, like I said, I got my little 1200 here and I got my 300 behind me. We can do statement lists, sure. That's what STL is for those of you who didn't know. There's also SFC. SFC is sequential function charts. And then there is what Siemens calls SCL, which is structured control language. That is actually structured text. We're in the same family that we are with Visual Studio there. If then statements, do while statements, etc. I could cover that also. But really that's maybe better left to, like I said, Beckhoff or Visual Studio or whatever. But anyway, thanks everybody for hanging out. That's going to be it for me today. Join me for the next one. Join the Automation Academy if you get a chance. And IO Central, it's free. Thanks a lot, guys, and we'll see you later.